Welcome, everyone. I am so glad you are joining us for today's deep dive. We have a genuinely fascinating subject to get into today.
We really do. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so to set this up for you, I want you to imagine something. Imagine you've just survived a terrible car crash.
Oh, man.
Right, it's awful. You're standing on the side of the highway, your heart is just hammering against your ribs, and the ambulance lights are flashing across the asphalt. And then a police officer walks up with a notepad.
Right, and they need a statement.
Exactly. You have to dictate exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So you give them the dry, factual report, the time of day, the speed of the car, the exact angle of the impact, maybe the horrific sound of the metal crunching.
Yeah, you're just purely documenting the physical reality of surviving.
Yes, precisely. But then, let's say a year later, you sit down at a piano. You don't write a police report this time. You write a deeply emotional, sweeping piece of music about that exact same event.
A completely different way of processing it.
Yes. Okay, let's unpack this. The raw police report and the sweeping symphony are attempting to document the exact same moment in time. But they are relying on entirely different architectural structures of the human brain to do it.
That gap, that massive gap between the physical documentation of survival and the psychological digestion of trauma is the core of what we are exploring today.
And we've got a really incredible source text for this, don't we?
We do. Today we are looking at a single document from a source called the Wilderness Ranger Chronicle. Specifically, we're looking at entry number 152.
And this was originally posted somewhere else, right?
Yeah, it was published on a platform known as Poetic Mindfulness. They basically curate texts that explore how human beings use literary expression to process extreme psychological states.
Which is exactly what this ranger is doing.
Right. What this specific account provides is a real-time observation of a mind fracturing under the weight of near death.
It's intense.
Very. We get to see how an experience of sheer, unadulterated terror is split straight down the middle into two distinct halves. You have the panic of the physical body, and then later, the philosophical awe of the human mind.
And to convey what it actually feels like to be rendered completely insignificant by a vast, stampeding universe, the author doesn't just, tell us a straightforward story.
No, they don't.
They use two radically different literary formats. First, they give us this raw, unstructured prose to document the panic, and then they abruptly pivot into highly structured classical poetry to process the existential weight of it all.
It's a terrifying survival account, really. But the psychological mechanism behind how it is constructed is what makes it so gripping.
Let's start with the first part, the prose narrative. It's chapter 1, titled The Deluge, and the author describes a sudden storm as splashing ink upon the wilds of June.
Yeah, the physical reality of the event sets a pretty brutal stage. It is June 2nd, and the ranger is venturing deep into a mountainous region.
And then out of nowhere, right?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
A sudden, massive downpour triggers a violent flash flood. And I think for anyone listening who hasn't been in a canyon or a steep mountain pass during a torrential downpour, a flash flood is not merely a rising tide.
It's not just, oh, my boots are getting wet.
No, not at all. It is a catastrophic, instantaneous rewriting of the geography. The surging waters completely erase the mountain path. Turning back becomes physically impossible.
The sensory details in this prose section are suffocating. Honestly, you read it and you feel like you are drowning.
It's very visceral.
They write about these roaring rapids creating blinding waves, water moving so violently that it completely obscures the treacherous terrain beneath it.
Right, you are flying completely lined in a churning river.
Exactly. You can't see the hidden hazards. You can't see where you are putting your weight. The ranger describes stumbling into deep, hidden hollows in the rock and just crashing against jagged edges.
The physical toll is immediate.
Yeah, their feet are severely lacerated. They're bleeding into the floodwater just from the desperate attempt to find a solid place to stand.
We should probably look at the specific geography of where this person is trapped to, because it really dictates their psychological response.
Oh, right. The Stoss side.
Yes. The author mentions the Stoss side of the crags. In geological terms, the Stoss is the side of a hill or a rock formation that faces the advancing force.
Usually a glacier, right?
Usually, yes. But in this case, it's taking the brunt of the destructive weather system. It is the impact zone. It is steep, unyielding, and takes the absolute maximum punishment from the elements.
And the ranger is trapped right there.
Exactly. On one flank, colossal waterfalls are erupting straight out of the cliffside, threatening imminent rockfalls that could just crush them.
And on the other flank, literally just inches away, is a canyon echoing with thunderous waters. I mean, a single misstep, a single slip of a bleeding foot would sweep them away like a leaf.
The stakes couldn't be higher.
You know, I found myself thinking about the broader context of nature writing here, because there is this pervasive cultural trope of romanticizing the wilderness.
Oh, sure. The whole going into the woods to find yourself thing.
Exactly. We are constantly talking about connecting with the quiet peace of the universe. But when the water is rising around your waist and the cliff face is literally crumbling, that philosophical romanticism vanishes.
It evaporates entirely.
Right. When you are literally fighting for your life, there's no room for deep philosophical thoughts about the universe. In that moment, the brain shrinks down to a purely biological imperative. Just, where do I put my bleeding foot so my lungs don't fill with water?
What's fascinating here is how the prose format physically mirrors that biological override.
How so?
Well, when the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, is hijacked by mortal danger, there is no cognitive space for a metaphor or a grand philosophical observation.
Right, you're not writing poetry when you're drowning.
Exactly. The prose in the deluge is breathless, chaotic, and strictly anchored in the flesh. It is an unfiltered accounting of lacerations, blinding waves, and the sheer physics of the water.
It's just rapid-fire facts of survival.
Yes. And by stripping away structure, the prose authentically documents the unstructured chaos of almost dying. It represents the immediate, grounded reality of human insignificance when a mountain simply decides to wash you away.
That brings up an interesting question for you listening. Think about a moment of sudden panic in your own life.
Yeah, that's great exercise.
Your brain doesn't compose a beautiful narrative, does it? It just takes a rapid-fire inventory of threats.
That is exactly what it does.
And the prose here is that threat inventory. It culminates with the ranger finally escaping the danger after, I think, more than an hour of desperate physical struggle.
Over an hour, yes.
They collapse onto the solid ground, utterly exhausted, and they write that they felt as though they had returned from another life.
The body survived.
But surviving the physical danger is really only half the battle, isn't it?
It is. Once the physical threat subsides, the adrenaline begins to metabolize, and the higher cognitive functions come back online.
And then the reality of it hits you.
Exactly. The mind suddenly has to process the terrifying reality of what just happened. The fact that the fragile biological machine almost stopped working forever.
And this is where the prose format reaches its limit.
It does. Unstructured, breathless prose is excellent for documenting physical panic, but it is an entirely inadequate vessel for holding existential weight. The chaos of prose simply cannot soothe a traumatized mind.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the author realizes that prose is insufficient, they abandon it completely.
A total shift.
Yeah, the second half of the source text shifts into this highly elevated realm of classical poetry, specifically a poem titled Stoss in the Crags, a classical rhyme.
Right.
To understand this shift, I think it helps to imagine zooming out on a digital map.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. So in the prose narrative, we are stuck in street view. We're staring at the terrifying jagged rocks right in front of us. But the poetry clicks the zoom out button until we are in orbit.
Looking down at the whole thing.
Exactly. We are looking down at the entire stampeding universe and realizing we are just tiny specks of dust. We swap the microscope for a telescope.
And in the poem, the language immediately reflects that. It leaves the bleeding feet behind and adopts a macroscopic view of destruction.
Do you have the opening lines?
I do. The opening lines read, "The skies collapsed upon the wild of June. The mountain paths dissolved in sudden ruin."
Wow.
The focus elevates from a flooded hiking trail to the collapse of the sky itself. The author is framing the event not as a personal accident, but as a cosmic undoing.
It's massive.
It is. They continue by establishing a terrifying symmetry. They write, "Upon the left the crumbling cliffs did weep, upon the right the canyon thundered deep."
I do have to ask, though, why make it rhyme? I'm trying to understand the psychological leap here.
That's our question.
How does a brain go from bleeding and panicking on a rock to imposing a strict ABAB rhyme scheme on the exact same trauma? It feels almost counterintuitive, you know, forcing something so wild into a neat little box.
It might seem that way, but it is actually a deeply ingrained psychological defense mechanism.
Oh, really?
Yes. When you experience something completely chaotic and incomprehensible, like a flash flood that nearly erases you from existence, your brain craves order.
Oh, I see.
Imposing a strict poetic meter and a predictable rhyme scheme on a chaotic memory is a way of gaining cognitive mastery over it.
So it's about control.
Exactly. A steady, rhythmic meter mimics a calm heartbeat. It physically soothes the nervous system.
That makes so much sense.
Furthermore, by using classical poetry, the author is tying their modern, isolated survival story to the ancient Stoic tradition of epic poetry. It elevates the trauma from a random, pointless accident into a grand narrative of human endurance.
And that macroscopic view fundamentally changes how the author places themselves in the narrative.
It really does.
Because in the prose, they were a desperate animal struggling for an hour. But in the poem, they define their own life as microscopic dust.
A huge shift in perspective.
Yeah. They write that if their soul had folded right there, it would be a luxury. They explicitly state, I traded my microscopic dust to witness the stampeding weight of the universe.
Which raises an important question. How does a person reconcile their own microscopic nature with the sheer crushing scale of the universe without falling into total nihilism or despair?
Yeah, how do they not just completely break down?
For this ranger, the psychological bridge is awe.
Ah,
Yes. They fully accept their insignificance. They recognize that their life, when measured against the stampeding weight of a flooded canyon, is utterly negligible.
but they don't despair over it.
No, instead of despairing at that realization, they reframed the near-death experience as an existential transaction.
Yeah.
They willingly traded the safety of their microscopic dust for a front-row seat to the majesty of the cosmos.
They actually write that they have no regrets in this fragile life, and they consider witnessing nature's devastating power to be a sublime privilege.
Even at the cost of almost dying.
Yeah. They call the experience a transformation of soul. It is an incredibly brave, incredibly stoic way to process near death.
It is profound.
The poetry represents this grand, zoomed-out acceptance of our fragile place in the universe. But I have to push back on this a bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
Does that high-minded philosophy actually hold up against human instinct?
You are identifying the central tension of the entire document.
Because there's a contradiction here, isn't there?
A major one. The text presents us with the coexistence of two completely contradictory emotional states. The author builds this towering philosophical monument in the poem, claiming stoic peace with the overwhelming power of nature.
Claiming no regrets.
Right. But if we cross-reference the poem with the prose, and specifically look at the final lines of the text, the facade of the fearless cosmic philosopher fractures entirely.
It totally shatters, because in the prose section, almost immediately after they talk about the stampeding majesty of the universe and having no regrets, they drop this line.
I love this part.
They say, however, if asked to experience it a second time, I would refuse instantly, because it utterly scared the living daylights out of me.
The tonal whiplash between transformation of the soul and scared the living daylights out of me is profound.
It's deeply human.
Yeah.
And frankly, a little funny in a dark way.
It really is.
You have this sweeping observation echoing from the heavens, followed immediately by the voice of a terrified hiker who just wants to go home.
Yeah, exactly.
And this fracture isn't just in the prose either. In the classical poem, after writing beautifully about trading their microscopic dust to witness the universe, the poem concludes with a final stanza that is completely walled off from the rest of the text.
Yes, visually walled off.
It is literally enclosed in parentheses,
Visually and structurally, those parentheses are vital. They act as a boundary line.
keeping the two feelings separate.
Right. They separate the grand cosmic declarations of the epic poem from a quiet, whispered confession.
The final parenthetical stanza reads, "But if that cloud ever returns, allow me, like a frightened child, to turn and run away."
That single stanza represents the collapse of the author's grandiose philosophical acceptance back into primal human vulnerability.
Wow.
It is the mechanism that bridges the gap between the high-minded poet who views themselves as cosmic dust and the terrified, bleeding animal who just wants to survive.
The parentheses physically hold the fear.
Exactly. The structure of the parentheses mimics the psychological containment of fear, tucking it away so it doesn't dismantle the grand philosophy, but acknowledging it must still exist.
So what does this all mean?
Well, I think...
Like, is the author contradicting themselves? How can someone definitively state, I have zero regrets, it was a sublime privilege, while in the exact same breath begging, please let me run away like a frightened child if this ever happens again?
Seems like a paradox.
It feels like a contradiction that unravels the entire philosophical takeaway.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of human psychology, we see that this isn't a contradiction at all.
It isn't.
Not at all. It is the ultimate unfiltered truth of the human condition. We are a species uniquely capable of holding two opposing realities at the exact same time.
That dual capacity.
Right. We have the cognitive capacity to hold metaphysical awe in our minds, while simultaneously holding biological terror in our nervous systems.
Oh, that makes sense.
We can intellectually understand that we are insignificant specks of dust in a vast, unfeeling universe, and we can find genuine, profound beauty in that grand design. But our physical bodies do not care about poetry.
No, they don't.
Our biology is violently programmed to survive.
And the dual narrative structure of the Wilderness Ranger Chronicle is the perfect architectural representation of that internal divide.
Perfectly stated.
The poetry is the vessel for the awe. It holds the intellect, the meaning-making, the telescope, the cosmic scale.
Yes.
And the prose is the vessel for the terror. It holds the adrenaline, the lacerated feet, the microscope, the instinct to flee.
You absolutely need both formats to tell the full, honest truth of what it means to be human in the face of absolute insignificance.
What if they hadn't done that, though? What if they had only published the prose narrative?
Well, we would have a gripping, visceral survival story, but it would lack the profound psychological insight. We wouldn't get that zoom-out effect that recontextualizes trauma into meaning.
And what if they had only published the poem?
If the world only saw the classical rhyme, it might read as hollow.
Or disconnected from reality.
Exactly. It is very easy to write elegantly about being microscopic dust from the safety of a dry room with a warm cup of coffee.
So true.
But because the author forces us to read the prose first, because we are made intimately aware that they were in the churning water, bleeding and fighting against the stoss of the mountain for over an hour, the poetry is earned.
It carries actual weight.
Yes, the philosophical awe carries weight because we know it was forged in the fire of genuine biological terror. That final stanza in the parentheses, the plea to run away like a frightened child, validates the epic poem.
It grounds the philosophy in reality.
Right, by acknowledging the terrifying physical cost of that cosmic perspective.
You know, the way this source material uses the mechanics of literature to map the mechanics of the traumatized brain, it's going to stick with me.
It's a powerful framework.
They used chaotic, unfiltered prose to survive the physical flood, to document the frantic inventory of the body. Then they used the predictable, sweeping structure of classical poetry to survive the existential flood, to calm the mind and document the vastness of the universe.
And there is a direct, practical application here for anyone listening.
Definitely.
We all encounter forces that render us insignificant. The next time you face something overwhelmingly massive, whether it is the raw, destructive forces of nature, a sudden and catastrophic life upheaval, or just the creeping heavy weight of existential dread when you look up at the clear night sky.
We've all been there.
Remember this dual narrative. Remember that it is a fundamental part of the human design to feel profoundly awestruck by the scale of what you are facing, while simultaneously feeling the biological urge to turn and sprint in the opposite direction.
You don't have to choose.
Exactly. You do not have to choose between finding meaning in the awe and yielding to the fear. Your brain is architecturally built to hold both.
Which brings us right back to the side of the highway.
The car crash.
The car crash. On the one hand, you have the factual, unmetered police report. That is your prose. The documentation of the damage, the raw physics of the impact, the biological reality of surviving the moment.
Right.
On the other hand, you have this structured emotional symphony you compose a year later. That is your poetry. The rhythm you impose on the chaos, the meaning you extract from the trauma, the way you reconcile your fragile body with the crushing weight of the world.
It's a beautiful way to frame it.
But exploring this leaves me with one final lingering thought for you to carry with you as we wrap up. If prose is the chaotic tool we use to document what happens to our physical bodies in a crisis, and poetry is the structured tool we use to document what happens to our souls in the aftermath, what format do we use to document the quiet, haunting spaces in between? What language is left for us when we are simply standing on the shoulder of the road, staring at the wreckage, waiting for the storm to pass?